All right, so now I'd like to welcome on screen tonight's presenter is Selena. How are
Hi,
you?
everyone. Good. How are you?
Great. Well, we're excited for this presentation. Um, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera and microphone off, but I'll be here in the background if you need me. And
Okay.
take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining me this evening. So, as Chris already said, we are going to be doing a presentation for Archives Awareness Week called Money Talks: How Banking Records Contextualize Florida History. So I just want to make you all aware that this is part of a larger Archives Awareness Week project that the library is doing this week. I can tell you that we have some wonderful in-person programs coming up this Friday and Saturday at Saunders and the C. Blythe Andrews libraries. And also, don't forget, we have a contest going on, the Burgett Reenactment Photo Challenge. So you can visit us on Instagram at Tampa Hills Lib and send us your photos using the hashtag #LikeABurgett. 3 random selected winners will receive a Burgett Brothers photo of their choice donated by Bob Baggett Photography. The last day for submissions will be on this Saturday, July 16th by 4 p.m. And also, if you want to continue the experience, I'll give you guys a little sneak peek of the program. These are some of the books that I used in creating it. So we have Bubble in the Sun, which is an awesome book about the real estate market in the 1920s here in Florida. It helped inform a lot of the things I was doing about the project. And I also have a good book called Creating a Local History Archive. So how to do the actual work of making this presentation that you see. And there's also a very nice exhibit at the John F. Germany Library in downtown Tampa on the 4th floor that goes into more detail about the bank ledgers and even shows off some of them themselves if anybody's interested. You can always make your way over there and see it live after this. Okay. So first things first, since this is a program about archival records, we need to know what is a record. So the Society of American Archivists define it as information or data created or received by an organization in the course of its activities, organizational record. So records can be anything. Like looking at the Burgett brother photo that we have on the screen here, that's a record. It doesn't just have to be a written piece of paper or a ledger. It can be a uniform. It can be a floppy disk, CD, USB. All of these are different types of records. And I find that the Florida Banking Records collection is very important to the library's collection because these are the records that remain of banks that survived turbulent times in the 20s with the real estate crash, as well as the Great Depression. These ledgers have entries that represent businesses, churches, and schools, and prominent individuals in the Tampa Bay area, a lot of whom you'll see in this presentation, and you'll recognize a couple of them. They're enduring legacies. Now, I already kind of got into the records of the collection with the ledgers, but we also have some atlases, scrapbooks, pictures, and ephemera. Ephemera is just a really fancy word for things that were originally expected to only have a short-term usefulness or popularity. So think about your travel brochures, things that you get at AAA. In the Florida Banking Collection, we have ephemera like bank advertisements. So they say, you know, come to this bank, you know, come to that bank. We have like the front flaps of old checkbooks, you know, for those of you in the crowd who remember checks back in the day, and things like that. And here's a little background on the collection. So you might be wondering, where did the bank records come from? They kind of come from all over the tri-state area. We've got some from Hillsborough State Bank, which was in Plant City. The Bank of Dunedin, that's in Pinellas County in the city of Dunedin, Florida. We have some from Tampa, obviously, and we have, last but not least, Sun Bank, which we now know it today as SunTrust when it merged, and that's all the way over in Orlando, but I couldn't get a map that had Orlando in it too. And this one just looks cooler, right, everyone? Now, you might be wondering how we got these items. So several years back, they were actually being stored in a warehouse and were scheduled to be destroyed. But a SunTrust Bank employee asked the Florida History and Genealogy Library if they would want to accept the donation because he thought they had historical significance. So he actually went on his personal time in his personal vehicle, loaded up all the records and moved them to the library himself. So they were located in, if those of you who've been to the downtown library, they were in the West building originally. And then when they destroyed that building in 2019, they were moved to the 4th floor. And then in 2021, we were finally able to start work on the actual process of preserving, creating, and cataloging all of these records. Some of them are over 100 years old, so they definitely needed a little bit of work, but we have been in the process. So far, I think we've done about 10 ledgers and more are being done on the way. They're being added. You can go view them. And we were able to start doing some historical research that more informed our local history about them. And we were able to even create a museum style display that I mentioned earlier that's on the 4th floor where you can see different books and you can kind of learn the nitty gritty behind what it takes to preserve all these records. You know, you got to clean things, you have to sometimes brush away dead bugs, you know, all the fun stuff. I even got to wear a lab coat while doing some of it, and isn't that fun? Now, you might be saying, bank records don't really mean anything to me. And to be fair, I would agree with you. I'm not much of a numbers gal myself. There's a reason I'm a liberal arts major. But they too more than just show us the numbers. They show us how society was at the time. As I alluded to earlier, you can learn about prominent local figures, what local businesses have stayed around and endured, but you can also learn things like hurricane history. Yes, hurricanes aren't just something that started with Irma and Charlie and Andrew. And then there's also regional holidays that don't get celebrated anymore. It can kind of show you a shift in how society values things, you know, what holidays are in, what holidays are out. And they also serve as primary sources. These books help us understand the history. They're not just, they help confirm what we've learned in books. So it's not just being told that, you know, World War I happened. We can see because there was somebody there, somebody who was taking notes and keeping records of all of this stuff. And now we'll kind of move into some of these aspects and go into a little bit more detail of what I found on my adventures through the Florida Banking Records collection. So the first picture we have here is from one of the banks that was in Tampa. And this might be a familiar name to some. This is Peter O'Knight. Peter O'Knight served as a state attorney for Hillsborough County in the 1890s. He also helped found Exchange National Bank, and he was president of TECO, Tampa Electric Company. And you might recognize his name nowadays because there is a lovely airport that's been named in honor of him too, that's now a part of Tampa International Airport. I love looking at something like this. Obviously, we see that name all over town, and this adds something personal to it. So you can see here by looking at this that, yeah, he started doing his banking in 1920, and he continued putting in deposits all the way up until April 1926. And Peter O'Knight had a very lucrative career because he was into a lot of things. He was a regular Renaissance man at the time. I can tell you that I saw an account for one of the state of Florida departments that was in this ledger as well, and it didn't have nearly the amount of money that Mr. O'Knight has here. Now, this one might be a little less well known, but we'll kind of get into how big of a role they played here in Tampa. Now, I found this one particularly interesting because that little piece of paper you see in the right-hand corner that has all the names was folded up, and it was paper clipped to the page. Now, here's an archivist little tip for you. A, Scotch tape is horrible. Please don't ever use it. I guess I'm giving you two. B, paper clips are very bad for paper documents because they rust over time. As you can see, you can actually see the imprint of where the paper clip was because it had rusted onto the paper. It was kind of hard to move. And as I undid it, I noticed that it says allow no withdrawals. And then it has the names of Cotter Brown, Amy B. Cotter, Leroy Cotter, Cotter Brown Realty Company. And then it says injunction writ 1/20/24. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Why is this family getting an injunction? What did they do? And what is this realty company? I've never heard of them. So I decided to go do a little bit of research. So first things first, I went to the city directories of Tampa and I looked in 1924 and I found all the Browns in there, and I even found the real estate company. And then from there, I was able to find the address of one of the actual realty company that was in the First National Bank building that was on the corner of Madison and Franklin. Now, to give you some perspective, if you've ever been to downtown Tampa, if you know where the Gin Joint restaurant is, on the right side, there's going to be the Vault. It's a nice venue if you've ever gone to a wedding there. It's that part of it. So that's where the office was located. And then I was able to do a little bit more research by going into the digital collections on hcplc.org and find out that they were in several newspaper articles. They were actually a very prominent family. The father, Leroy Cotter, owned Whedon Drugstore, which was a popular drugstore that was in Tampa at the time. And it also told me all about him and his wife getting married, all the children they had, which we'll go into in a little bit more in a second. Because I found out a lot about Nancy over here. So Nancy is the one with an arrow above her. And this is a photo from the Burgett Brothers collection. It says, Gasparilla maids pose seated around lily pool in domestic garden, Tampa, Florida. And I knew from doing my research and finding in the article that they had had all these kids, I decided to look into it, and I thought her name sounded familiar. And I remember looking through the Ye Mystic Crew book, and sure enough, it was listed that she was in the 1930 Gasparilla Court, and she was the second maid to Queen Lucille Trice. So by looking that up and seeing what year it was, I was able to go on the website and I looked for the Burgett brother photos only. I selected that. And then I was able to narrow it down by the years, because when I tried typing in Nancy's name, nothing came up. But I was like, there's got to be a picture from the 1930s court. Now, I know that if anybody's familiar with Gasparilla history, there are a couple of courts that we don't have pictures for because there was a massive fire and some things burned. But I figured there should be something from this. And this is how I found it, using the years. And then I was also able to discover that there was a newspaper article we also had in the system that talked about her wedding. Her and her husband ended up getting married in France, and it made the front page of the paper at the time. Nancy was a regular socialite. She even went to Florida State College for Women. She got a degree. She was ahead of her time. She was a lady I would have liked to be friends with. And I just thought it was so interesting that this family had played such a part in Tampa. They had a real estate company. They were in the directories. They had owned drugstores. They were in the paper all the time. But unfortunately, there comes a point where you have to learn and research where sometimes you just have to call it quits. And I lost track of them after about 1932. I was never able to find out why they had a writ or injunction. And they just fell into obscurity. But without these banking ledgers, we would have never known about this family. And I kind of like to know now that when I look at this photo, I can put a name to the face. And isn't that always exciting? You never know where your research will take you with looking at stuff like this. And now we're going to move on to some holidays that I was discussing that have changed over time. So a big one that we have here in this ledger shows Robert E. Lee's birthday as a legal holiday. Now, a lot of people have a hard time classifying Florida in the Civil War history. A lot of people go, it was located in the South, but how much fighting actually happened? What was happening? How Southern were they? And I get it. Florida's a very diverse state. We had a big Hispanic population. We had a lot of ex-enslaved people here. So how much really got done for the Confederacy? But in doing my research, I actually saw that there were over 140 military raids and skirmishes here. There's also several monuments to the Confederacy that are located in Florida, but it's usually where soldiers had retired or where one of these skirmishes had occurred. So like Jacksonville, Miami, or Key West. But in also doing further research, I found out that only 4 states declared it a legal holiday. So yes, we're one of the special ones here. And it just shows how strong a connection they had to the South and the Confederacy in the time. This ledger I know was back from the 30s, and I was able to look through and see that they celebrated his birthday up until the mid 50s in these ledgers. So it was not something that was hidden at all. It was often celebrated. And I get it. It's not a thing that we think about a lot because now we have Mickey Mouse and the tourism boom that happened starting in the 50s and 60s. Florida's not one of those places that you look at as far as Civil War tourism, not like a Virginia or a Mississippi or a Pennsylvania. I can also say that other Confederate generals that were included were Stonewall Jackson's birthday was also celebrated as a legal holiday. And we also had the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis's birthday, celebrated too as a legal holiday. And both of those were also continually celebrated until the mid 1950s. But now moving on to what I believe is my favorite holiday I found in here that we don't celebrate anymore, Farmer's Day. So Farmer's Day was traditionally celebrated throughout the United States on about October 12th. This is usually traditional harvest time. Now, for those of you in the audience, I'm sure you're well aware of the different crops that we have here in Florida, which include strawberries and citrus like oranges. But that's not the period for when you would harvest those crops. But I found out that Florida's sugarcane was actually harvested starting in October. Sugarcane is not a crop that's native to the Tampa area. It can grow anywhere in Florida because of the climate, but it's mostly grown in the Everglades around Lake Okeechobee. And if you can look at this picture over here and see through the handwriting where it says holiday, something that I just love about the handwriting and the spelling of this is that holiday is misspelled. It's spelled with 2 L's. I felt like when I look at documents that are in the Library of Congress or something like that, or on Harvard's website, everything is perfect. And things weren't always perfect back then. People misspelled things. They don't have spell check like we do on our word processors nowadays, or they can't talk into the ledger and have it automatically spell it for them. And it was in pen. You know, the pen was what you used for professional things, what you used to make official records and documents. So there's no, you know, eraser to be able to erase it, or whiteout. Actually, doing my research, I saw if there was a mistake like with the numbers. As you can kind of see in the corner over here towards the edge of farm, it's like in the last column where it says balance, like one number, like one set of numbers looks really dark. It looks like it was rewritten over multiple times to redo a number. I also saw where it looks like you can see how there's like light blue and light red lines. I've seen parts where those are scraped away and it's just a white circle with the number in it. So they probably had to use like a pen knife or a letter opener to scratch away at it because there wasn't any whiteout to use. And I just think that this adds more human quality to these people who were working with these objects and ledgers. And again, just adds a whole different level of knowing that, yeah, people couldn't always spell back then. Makes me feel a lot better. And now moving on to some more of that hurricane history I was discussing earlier. So I really liked the inscription on this one. It says, small activity due to storm. And I looked at the date and it says August 27th, 1949. And this was a little bit trickier to research because hurricanes didn't have the phonetic names that we know today, like, you know, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Charlie. You know, they would just kind of go by the year, or they were named after a location. And that didn't change until the mid 1950s. The 1949 Florida hurricane has also been known as the Delray Beach hurricane. And this was a massive storm. It's in the top 10 of the history of the state. This was a Category 4. It had winds of up to 130 miles an hour. And if you're unfamiliar with the hurricane scale, there's only 5 categories and 5 is the highest. So this was a very powerful storm. Surprisingly, it only killed 3 people, but it cost over $52 million in damage. And that was $52 million in 1949 money. So I can only imagine with the inflation, especially what we have now, how much that would cost. Another thing that I liked about this one too, again, goes to the fact of studying studying humans with these. You have to learn people's handwriting. So for this one, I had a hard time figuring out that that word is activity. I was able to see small, due to storm, fairly well. And basically, because I had looked at these ledgers so many times, I had to learn how to analyze the handwriting. I'd be like, this person usually makes T's this way or makes I's this way. And sometimes I even had to go for help. I asked a couple of people, what do you think this word looks like? And that was what we ended up coming up with. So that's another thing I have to say about doing research in archives is never be afraid to ask somebody else. Especially nowadays, I know that in schools there is been a shift from not focusing on cursive penmanship, and sometimes it can be really hard because some of these letters look all the same. So definitely don't be afraid to ask your friendly librarians like me for if you can figure out what that word is. I also like that it says small activity due to a storm. So there was obviously some activity that happened that day. It makes me speculate on what happened. You know, did somebody just happen to come into work and miss the radio news bulletin or something that they shouldn't go in? Did somebody try to make still a deposit that day? But there was definitely nothing significant enough to put numbers on. And this just continues adding to the knowledge and the curiosity for the history at the time. And then last but not least, we have Armistice Day, or as we call it today, Veterans Day. So this goes back to showing how these ledgers are primary documents. I can definitely say that this is the best example of it. If you can look at the date in the corner on the left-hand side, it says November 11th, 1919. And Armistice Day was declared a legal holiday in 1918 by President Woodrow Wilson. It was to commemorate the end of World War I. And this just goes to show how quickly things can be enacted. Like, I know, for example, a lot of us had Juneteenth off this year, and it was signed into effect last year. So this is kind of their version of that. You can even tell, like with the way Armistice was written, I love it because it looks like they were kind of rushing, and I'm not, maybe they weren't quite sure how to spell it because it was new to them. This was a brand new holiday. And it also made me wonder, what do you think they did with it for the first time this random day in November? In some places, that's awfully cool time. It's not like a Labor Day or a Memorial Day where you can still kind of go to the beach. And then again, it shows that Armistice Day was something that really happened. It's not just a story in our history books with a picture of Woodrow Wilson at a podium talking about it. And it shows the shift. It was called Armistice Day all the way up until 1954 in the ledgers. 1954 is when the name was changed because the US Representative Edward Rees of Kansas proposed a bill saying that the name should be changed in order to honor all veterans. So those included from World War II, and also, I believe the fighting in Korea had started, but like, don't quote me on that. I'm not a military historian, unfortunately. But yes, it wanted to be more encompassing. And Veterans Day is something we even still celebrate today. So this is definitely a great example of time and change that happens in history and shows how valuable these records are and how we should keep them and continue preserving them and working with them. And I think they're great for people to be able to study and use. If you wanted to study how legal holidays came up, if you're studying labor unions, you know, or you're looking at the banking industry, these are wonderful examples to be able to look at and see. And that comes to the end of my portion of the presentation. And you can contact us online. And then also you can always go down to that downtown library at John F. Germany, go up to the 4th floor and take a look around and see if you guys have any questions or find some adventures of your own. But now I think it's probably time for some questions. Is there anything I said that piqued somebody's interest, Chris?
Yes. So we'll go ahead and we can come back on camera here.
Okay.
And yeah, that was a great presentation. So many interesting things in those ledgers. All right. So like Selena said, you can ask questions now, right? So in the question section in your control panel, you can type them in there, or if you're watching on a tablet or a phone, tap the question mark icon. So we do have some questions here. Someone is asking, if the records are segregated. Is that correct? I think there was an example earlier, and they were wondering if there was any segregation in the records that you noticed.
So I didn't notice, like, there wasn't separate ledgers for African Americans, but I can say, and I'll pull up pictures so we have a better idea. In this one, for example, I don't know if you can see my screen. Oops.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I'll just go forward.
Yeah.
So in this one, I did notice that there was a woman who was a laundress, and they did have in parentheses what her race was, using a word that we don't usually use nowadays. So that was the only example I really saw of it, but I didn't see anything else. I didn't notice there was like nothing put in parentheses for any Hispanics or Germans that might have been working with the collections.
Okay.
I mean, working at these industries.
I see. All right. Someone commented about Robert E. Lee's birthday, and that is still a designated legal holiday in Florida, just as a FYI.
Oh, okay then, good to know.
Yeah, I guess there's a statute there that I don't think anything closes on that day, but it is still one of the observed state holidays. Let's see, we got some more questions here. People are asking if they can come to the library and see these ledgers in person.
Yes, so there is a little caveat to that. So if you go online to hcplc.org and if you type in Florida Banking Collection, there is a list, a bibliographic record where you can see which volumes that you can, where you can observe them. You can't necessarily see all of them because these are banking records. So some of them, there is a time limit that you have to wait before you can see them. So ones that we have some that are from the 80s. Those people are still alive. We wouldn't be able to show those records. There is also one that has social security numbers in the back. And to follow the national archival standards, you have to wait 80 years after a person has died before you can show anything if it has a social security number in there. And I think I did the math, and it's going to be sometime in like 2030 something that we could open those up for everybody, because I gave the general view that I hoped everybody lived into their 90s and had lots of grandchildren and were extremely happy. But yes, you can see them, and then what you'll have to do is if you go to the 4th floor, you at the John F. Germany Library, you could say, oh, I want to take a look at this, and then a staff member would get one for you, and you would be able to look through it, and you could take pictures as long as there's no flash, and you're always welcome to make notes.
Okay, that's good to know. Related to that, someone's asking if are they able to make copies or request copies to be made, like paper copies of the records that are available?
So unfortunately, I'm not at the downtown library to know if they still have their book scanner that's on the 4th floor. I would say if you can use the book scanner and if it will fit, you should be able to make a copy of it, but you wouldn't be able to like throw it on a normal Xeroxing machine to make a copy.
All right, that's good to know. All right, let's see. We have another question here. They're asking, how are these ledgers stored? Are there any special steps or processes that are in place?
Yes, that's actually a great question. So what we do is once they've been cleaned, we put them in special archival boxes. These boxes are gray. They usually are acid-free. And then I also put a layer of acid-free tissue paper on the bottom of the box as well to store them. And then they are put on shelves. They're usually in the dark, away from direct sunlight. They're in the coolest space that's in the building, so we don't have any further damage, because heat and humidity and sunlight are your worst friends here in Florida when it comes to keeping these records.
Yeah. All right.
Pure.
Yeah, no, and that acid-free, the acid too can speed up the deterioration, right, of the paper and all of that.
Yes, because most paper prior to 1982, when there was a law passed, there was no level of a certain amount of acid that had to be in the paper. So if you have acidic paper, an acidic box, you are just asking for that process to be sped up.
Right. Okay, so we got some few more questions here. Someone's asking, what are the size, and maybe they range a bit, but what are the size of these volumes? Is it a standard size or do they vary in different years? And thanks so much for the interesting presentation.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm glad somebody else found, banking records fun to learn a little bit more about. They do range. I noticed they range based off what they're doing, what they were for. So a lot of the regular like deposit ledgers are very large. I would say they were like 2 8x10 stacked up against one another. This one that I'm showing on the screen is very small. So like a better example would be, like if you can kind of see here, it's almost so large it goes out of the frame of my picture. That's how big some of them can be. Yeah. And also their width changes too. Like I noticed mortgage ledgers tend to be a lot thinner, whereas the daily deposits are a lot larger. And I think that that's also because they were doing so much of these calculations, by hand. So they needed to have a little bit more space to work with. And then there are some from Hillsborough Bank that are huge. They are half a regular, like, plastic table that you would like set up for like a party event size. And I'm not over exaggerating. You can go take a look at them if you wanted.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, you talked about, that it's a different time and they needed a lot of the room for all that record keeping. It's, in this day and age we have computers that can store all that stuff, but yeah, you needed that space. All right, we have one more question here, and I think you maybe touched on it earlier. Are there plans to digitize these records? Or is there a process in place already?
Yes, there are plans to digitize, especially as I mentioned earlier, some of the things in the collection include like a lot of wonderful photos that I think the public should definitely get to see. I can tell you one of my favorites is it looks like it was from a 4th of July display. So it's like a black and white picture with these bright white fireworks going off like in front of a bank, behind a bank building. And I think those are really cool to see. And there was one that shows an advertising fair that all the execs went to, and it looks like it could have been pulled as a still from the TV show Mad Men. So there are plans to digitize stuff like that. There's also a lot of scrapbooks, as I mentioned too, that we want to digitize those. Give people the opportunity to see if they can find grandma, if they remembered she used to be a secretary over there. But that would probably be left up to the people that are working at that library now. So that would be a better question to ask over there.
Of course. No, that's great. This is I think that's it for questions, but I don't see any more coming in. Let's just give it a few more seconds. But if you want to bring up the contact info slide while we wait, we can. Yeah, it looks like that's it for questions. These are all great questions, everyone. Thank you so much, and great answers from Selena, of course. So that's it for questions. So we'll go ahead and let you know that you can contact us here at the library at the number on the screen, 813-273-3652, or go online at hcplc.org/contact. Also on our website, you can submit your library story, and you can also access our calendar of events and find out about programs just like this one that are up and coming. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. And Selena, thank you so much again. This was a great session, lots of great information, and just goes to show you there's lots at the library that you can learn about and access. Thank you.
Yes, and it's all free.
That's right, that's right. All right, well, thank you. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
All right, bye everyone.